Hi there, I'm John Moore, and I am a shamanic teacher in the state of Maine. And today I want to talk to you about your Maine shamanic teacher. If you are a person who lives in Maine and you want to study shamanism, there are other choices besides me, and I am not going to try to convince you to study with me. I want you to find the best possible teacher. It does not do me any favors or you any favors if you don't get the best teacher for you. And you are very lucky to be if you do live in Maine, to be in a state with fantastic teachers, lots of fantastic teachers. So I'm going to go over how you might find a teacher, and how you know if you're going to connect and what sort of training you should be looking for, that sort of thing. This also applies if you do not live in the state of Maine, as I have trained people all over the world. I've trained with people from all over the world. People actually tend to come into Maine to train in shamanism. But that being said, there seems to be a large demand right now for shamanic teachers. And this makes a lot of sense given that we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Global pandemic is a type of crisis, and there is this archetypal awakening called a shamanic awakening or shamanic crisis, shamanic awakening, that happens as the result of crisis. So personal crisis, sometimes people wake up and say, this is the path for me. That's what happened to me. But we're in a global crisis, and shamanic awakening also happens in groups, in tribes, in countries, in families, when the group is under crisis. There's an impulse to awaken and become a spiritual healer, somebody who can gather information from spirit, that sort of thing. So your shamanic teacher. One of the nice things, as I said, about Maine is there's a very large community of people practicing shamanism, and these would refer to as shamanic practitioners. In my tradition, in my teaching tradition, and in many traditions, one does not apply the label of shaman to oneself. That is given to you by people or a teacher or what have you, and it would be very clear that you have been given that title and were able to carry that. And just to let you know, my teacher and my teacher's teacher do not use the label shaman to refer to themselves. So that's totally fine. You will notice that my website says Maine Shaman, and that's just so that people who are looking for shamanic things find that, but I am not calling I'm not calling myself that. Or at least it's a fine distinction, but it is what it is. And so depending upon the role that I'm playing, I will call myself a shamanic practitioner or shamanic teacher. So if I am working with a client one-on-one doing some healing work, or I'm doing a land clearing ceremony or a house blessing, or performing a wedding or blessing a baby or what have you, I will call myself a shamanic practitioner, because that's what I'm doing. I'm practicing shamanism. And I call myself a shamanic teacher because I teach shamanism, and I teach introduction to shamanism classes. I am getting ready to offer apprenticeships when I can work out how that's going to work, or whether we're coming out of the pandemic and that sort of thing. And I mentor students one-on-one, and I have been through a significant amount of teacher training. So what do you want to look for when you find to look for a teacher? And there are a few things, and it depends a little bit on what your goals are. So if you just want to take an intro to shamanism class, you just want to learn how to journey, you want to do a weekend or 3-day or a 4-day class, it matters, but it doesn't matter as much as if you were to sign on to do an apprenticeship or a long-term program or teacher training. So it's important to kind of recognize what your goals are up front, to realize what kind of connection you need to make with a teacher. very important to find a qualified teacher. You should be able to ask them about their training and about their practice. I think people should not be teaching things that they have not been taught how to teach. So I will give you an example. There's a ceremony called soul retrieval, and it is complicated, and learning to do soul retrieval is one thing. It's one set of training. Learning to teach soul retrieval to people so they can practice it is a whole other thing. So just because somebody practices soul retrieval or conducts soul retrieval ceremonies doesn't necessarily qualify them to teach that. So people should really be teaching things that they're qualified to teach. And you should be able to, when you approach a shamanic teacher, ask them who they trained with. And you can 9 times out of 10, you can Google that person. Google not just the person you're wanting to train with, but who their teacher is, and see what people say about them as a practitioner and a teacher. I also think that people should be actively practicing shamanism in order to teach, or at least have actively practiced for some period of time. And a lot of people like to jump in head first to stuff, and they haven't been doing it for a very long time and haven't been taught how to teach it. And there are dangers there. I've experienced this firsthand where, I have had experiences where people have gotten some psychological damage from a teacher who didn't really know how to keep a tight circle or maintain boundaries in a class, that sort of thing. So having done some teacher training, and that is very, very specialized training, and there should be years of training before teacher training happens, is also very important. So for me, before I became a shamanic practitioner, I did lots of training, several years of training. There were lots of pieces that I had to learn before I did that. You should not really, if you are wanting to become a shamanic practitioner, that is to work with other people in a healing capacity, you should not do that before you are qualified. And that takes way longer than a weekend class. It takes longer than a year. It's a number of years. And it was a number of years before I was comfortable doing that. But I have met people who practiced after a very short period of training without receiving the full training, and even started to perform ceremonies that they had not received or been trained to receive. So you should feel free to ask about that. You should feel free to look at somebody's reputation. What I do when somebody contacts me about, lots of people contact me and say, I'm interested in becoming your student, or I'm interested in mentoring, or I want to work with you in some capacity. If it's not simply for a healing, because honestly, I will provide healing for almost anybody that I feel like can be helped by me providing healing. That being said, if somebody asks for something that I'm not qualified to do, I would always refer them to somebody else. And so that is sort of an important indicator for me about whether somebody's heart is in the right place when it comes to teaching. So I would always want to meet with a person first. I will not accept a student I haven't met with before. That would be crazy. And this does not count introduction classes. Little short weekend workshops or seminars and that sort of really short periods of training don't really matter. They tend to be public and people can sign up for them who want to. And that being said, because it's not a long-term ongoing relationship. But if you were to get into a relationship with a teacher, you would want to have a significant meeting with them and have all of your questions answered. They make sure they're asking you intelligent questions like, what is your spiritual practice like? What are your, what is your support system like? If you have no spiritual practice and no support system, these are some things you really should be getting into alignment with before you study shamanism, because it's going to shake your life up a little bit. They should also inform you of what can happen. Should talk about what initiation is like, how it can shake your life up, and there's this sort of informed consent that needs to happen. If anybody makes shamanic training out to be rainbows and unicorns and floating on clouds, I would be very wary of that, because it is not. And there's dark stuff that can come up, and there's shadow work that you have to do. So make sure you have this meeting with this person. Make sure all of your questions are answered. And that can be as mundane as, what are your training programs like? How frequently do you meet? What if I want to back out of a program? What if an emergency happens? Like, detail level stuff. But you also want to know, what was your training like? How much training have you done? What topics have you trained in? What are your specialties? All shamanic practitioners have specialties. If they don't have specialties, I would question that as well. I have a few all shamanic practitioners, teachers should have one or more specialties. Some people are really, really focused on one topic. I have a few. For example, soul retrieval is a real specialty of mine. Almost everybody who comes to me, as a client, comes to me for soul retrieval. So that would be an answer I would give. And they should be able to think of an answer and not just say, well, all areas of shamanism. It's too generalized. That's not to say I or another teacher couldn't teach you lots of things that were outside of our expertise. But you just want to know that there is a depth of learning. So I've gone deeply into soul retrieval. I've gone deeply into shadow work, or I've gone deeply into, I haven't, but deeply into weather shamanism, or, shamanic work with the fae, or with elementals, or what have you. You just want to know that there are specialties, and then you want to know how those specialties align with what you're looking for. Lastly, I want to cover, if your intention is to become a shamanic practitioner, I would not be in a rush for that to happen. It's sort of like the old story when from martial arts, when a young martial arts student comes up and says, "Master, if I train really, really hard, how long do I have to train before I get my black belt?" And the master says, 10 years. He goes, "Okay, well, what if I train twice as hard?" And he says, 20 years. Well, how could that be? How could and it basically says, if you have one eye on the destination, there's only one eye that you can use to stay on the path. And it's like that with shamanism as well. I would go into shamanic training as just trying to learn as much as you can, trying to really absorb the knowledge. Rather than, and I'm a really broad learner. I like to learn a lot about a lot of things. But with shamanism, it's really about the depth of learning. It's really about how the learning sinks into your system, how deep you go with it, how much you internalize it, how much the learning changes you. And that's something you could ask about from a potential teacher. So whether or not you are in Maine, or you are in another state or another country, these are some guidelines that you can use, some loose guidelines. But ultimately, you have to feel really comfortable with the person who is your teacher. They have to make you feel safe. Safety is a very big issue. You can ask, how do you handle safety and vulnerability and confidentiality, all of these things, because really good training allows you to be vulnerable. It gives you a safe space to be yourself, to allow the things to come up that need to come up, to be emotional. I have cried during training. I have had really painful personal experiences come up during training, and that can happen. So ask about safety, vulnerability. Does the person keep a tight circle? What happens if there are unruly students? etc. All of these things are important questions. So hopefully this has been helpful in helping you think about who you might want to, or how you might want to go about finding a shamanic teacher. There are lots available. I am more than happy to refer. If you have any questions, you can contact me. There's a link to my website in the description down below. And feel free to contact me and say, I'm looking for a teacher who does this, who specializes in this. And chances are I know somebody, and if I don't know somebody, I will know somebody who knows somebody. So I'm happy to make that connection for you. With that being said, I hope you stay healthy and happy and all of those things, and I look forward to talking to you again.